Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my final Gameweek 1 team selection. I finally nailed down a draft that I'm quite happy with, and it's actually very similar towards my previous draft with a couple changes, mostly around the defense. In terms of the defense though, if we just move straight on there, Pickford is now in the team, Ederson is gone. We got some news reports that Ederson was actually discussed internally within City staff last season to potentially be benched or even dropped at times for Ortega. And that element of doubt in terms of City maybe actually rotating with keepers at one point in the season, even if it's just for one game, just calls into question why I would even want to spend 5.5 million on a City goalkeeper who could be benched. So because I don't want to lock up my team with Ederson and Ortega and go triple City like that, I'm going for Pickford instead. And part of this has also been spurred on by the Turner transfer to Nottingham Forest. So Matt Turner, who was the Arsenal goalkeeper, could be now the starting keeper for Nottingham Forest. And we know from some reporters that they're also pursuing Henderson on loan as well, so that could maybe actually depose Turner. But for the time being, based on the knowledge that we have from the Game Week 1 deadline, Turner could very well start Game Weeks 1, 2, and 3 at the bare minimum, and maybe he could be replaced potentially. But you still have access to a 4.0 starting goalkeeper, and we don't really have any other options in FPL that do that. Areola, who is commonly in our drafts, still isn't the starting keeper for West Ham, and West Ham still have some really bad games. What I like about Turner is you can get Game Week 2, which is a very nice fixture for Nottingham Forest, and also Game Week 5. So those two fixtures actually plug in really well because those are some of the deficiencies within Pickford's, let's say, Game Weeks 1 to 8 run. I understand what people are going to say. I mean, ultimately, Pickford is a deficient keeper. You could say that because, of course, of how Everton were so poor last season, particularly on the expected goals conceded, even under Sean Dyche. But I do like the idea that Everton simply have really good fixtures. And when you compare to, let's say, some of the other potential rotation options with Turner, you could be looking at, let's say, Johnstone. But I do think Game Week 7 and 8 are really good for Everton. So the opportunity to really face two relegation level opponents, in my opinion, is really lucrative, particularly if you're, let's say, set on a wild card 9 run. And actually, some people have actually done some research in terms of the pairing of Pickford and Turner. It goes really well until Game Week 14, but that's not really my concern. So for now, I'm actually set on Pickford and Turner. As far as Ruben Dias, though, he's going to be my player that I'm actually going for ahead of Stones for the time being. If we get news that Stones will start and potentially even in the midfield, I'll probably move towards Stones. That's the only transfer that I'm not 100% sure about in terms of my team, because we didn't see Stones play in the midfield position, the Community Shield. Sometimes what happens with Pep is he will start the season with a slightly different or rejiggled formation, and he'll tend to stick with that until it sort of runs into problems. And if Stones is to stay as a defender, I might actually prefer Ruben Dias because I have a little bit more confidence in terms of him actually securing the most amount of minutes within the City team. So that's why I'm going for Ruben Dias for now. It's purely a little bit of safety here with the minutes. As far as actual defenders I'm going to be playing with for Game Week 1, I'm going to go with Estupiñán and Gabriel. I don't really think they need much explanation, but I think I will also post a small little defense of Gabriel. I've seen some talk on the timeline that he could lose his position as a left center back. I think that's a little bit of overreading. He played all 38 games last season. He's someone who is still absolutely trusted by Arteta. A left-footed center back as well. Yes, of course, there are some other players in the team that could conceivably play in the left center back position, but I'm really struggling to see how he could lose his spot so quickly in the team. And as such an essential player, someone who's also great on set pieces, I think he is needed. He's also dominant in the air, which is something that Arsenal don't really have in spades. And so I really don't see how Gabriel would lose minutes in this team for the time being. As far as Estupiñán, I think he's absolutely nailed. He doesn't really need a defense. We're all going to go with him. Whether you actually want to move away from Estupiñán early on is going to be a separate question. I'm not really looking to do that in particular. I don't really like forcing transfers or booking transfers in advance. I like to think a little bit longer term, so Estupiñán stays in my team like so. As far as the midfield, it's exactly the same as the previous video. I'm going to go with Rashford and Fernandes. I've talked about it in terms of how these two players are leading in stat categories for their sort of price points in terms of expected goals and expected assists respectively. So there's no reason to really shy away from them when United actually have really good attacking fixtures. I'd say they obviously have some bad pinch points in terms of their defense. There are, for example, Game Weeks 2 and 4 that are quite tough for the defense, but there's still good opportunities for their attack, and that's why I'm heavily invested. As far as the Arsenal midfield, I don't think they really need much defense or explanation. Saka, of course, is the penalty taker, and until he loses the penalties, I don't really see his value dropping the game. Now, of course, there's a chance that he could lose them eventually once he takes his next penalty and potentially even misses it. But for now, Saka has a lot of value. I wouldn't try to jump the gun in terms of FPL planning, particularly at Game Week 1 when we have a whole season sort of to correct our mistakes, if you like to put it like that. As far as Odegaard, though, I think he's actually a great option, and I was really debating between Odegaard and Havertz. This is something that I talked about on my podcast on the FPL script. You can find it on my channel if you actually want to have a look at it. It's a more of an analytical video, but we talked about the Community Shield and what could happen in terms of going forwards. Are these games going to be Havertz games where he gets to play in the 9? And I think the thing ultimately with Havertz is, yes, he's going to be a short-term punt, but you could also still see that Arteta could rock out with Eddie Nketiah. The Havertz sort of 9 positioning within the City game could also have been tactical. I've seen that being said in terms of wanting to play over City with the long ball, for example, with him actually being able to be physical and actually hold the ball up well, which he actually did really well in the Community Shield game. You could argue that there's no need to play, let's say, Partey plus Rice, such a defensive formation and such a robust formation versus a Nottingham Forest. And I would tend to agree with that. So that could see Havertz, for example, dropping back into left centre mid, maybe having Nketiah getting some minutes. So that is a slight concern, I would say. But I think Nketiah could also, because he can get some minutes, I just have so much more guarantees with someone like Odegaard. And for now, I'm going to stick with Odegaard. He's someone we know will most likely get 88 minutes at the bare minimum. I think you can even see him play all those extra time minutes too, which could be really great for his bonus creation. And ultimately, he's a player who still has really good underlying stats when you compare to Saka or even Martinelli. Yes, Havertz could be a great short-term punt, but you also want to foresee what would happen if, let's say, Odegaard was to be kept as a long-term pick, and I think Odegaard has a bit more value there in terms of this draft structure. And worst case scenario, he becomes a cash cow for me. So I can always move away from an 8.5 midfielder because there's not too many that we necessarily want at that competing price because we already have Bruno. And so Odegaard can always be someone cheaper, even if it's Havertz or even if it's Maddison. So that's sort of my point of view there. As far as Mbeumo, yes, of course, Tottenham's going to be a slightly tougher fixture, but I just think that he is the best 6.5. And I've said it time and time again. I don't really think I need to rehash it particularly, but you've got penalties. Even if you're playing out wide, I think a lot of us, for some reason, are completely against the idea of Mbeumo playing out wide. When last season we perfectly rated someone like Mitoma, who is a wing player, and some of the best FPL players that we've known are wing players too. So I think Mbeumo is a great value pick. Underlying data is very good. It's actually better than Wisa's. We also saw without Tony that his underlying data was very good too. And that's the key thing. It's just about Mbeumo as a pick in isolation. And does he have more minutes than someone like Wisa? Absolutely he does, because I would say someone like Sade, who is a young talent from this Brentford team, could actually take minutes away from Wisa, whereas conceivably I wouldn't say the same for someone like Mbeumo. I think he's going to get a lot more minutes, and that's the security that I get with Mbeumo, particularly if I'm thinking a little bit long term. And that's why I've gone for this midfield. As far as the forwards though, because of the opportunity of the injuries, I think the forward that I'm only really interested in is actually going to be Nico Jackson, because it seems like the Vlahovic deal isn't actually close to being finalized, and so that does allow us to go for Nico Jackson. But because Chelsea's fixtures, even from an attacking point of view, in my opinion, aren't particularly good, game weeks 1 and 2, I think we can just wait and reserve ourselves for an opportunity to sort of go for Nico Jackson in game week 3. I can always move away from Odegaard or just simply one of my defenders, who you'll see later on in the draft, and then just actually go for Nico Jackson then away from someone like João Pedro, who's actually in my draft currently. And what I like about João Pedro is he has a perfect game week 1. He is the player that is going to be a slightly riskier pick for me, because I don't think I have enough information to say that João Pedro is going to be a 90-minute player for De Zerbi. I don't think anyone really is right now, from the attacking sense at least. But even if you look at the preseason, he was actually top 2 in terms of minutes played alongside Mitoma. So that's a really refreshing and positive sign. The Kudus deal as well doesn't seem any closer to being finalized. So that's also a huge benefit. We also saw him get penalties, and that's a huge plus and at a 5.5 price point, which is ridiculous when he has one of the best Game Week 1 fixtures too. So such a great and easy opportunity to jump onto him. And someone like Watkins, who's also one of the other preferred options in terms of template picks. I mean, we weren't necessarily rating Watkins until Jesus and Nkunku respectively were injured. I still think you can say that there's an opportunity to gamble on, let's say, not going for forwards to start the season and then just simply move into a Watkins when he starts to become essential in Game Week 7. And that's the opportunity that I'm taking here. And that's also why you'll see that in terms of my bench, I've gone extremely deep in my bench. I've actually gone for a bench consisting of James, Chilwell, Mubama, and Turner. So these players are going to be huge for me just because we now have an opportunity to really invest in a lot of rotation within the defenders because we're not spending as much money on the forward position. On top of that, as I said, I've spent more money in the midfield position too with someone like Odegaard, and that can always be repivoted to the midfield if I said Nico Jackson's essential by game week 3. So that's sort of the landscape of FPL for me. I think we can go for this punt, and James and Chilwell will start to play for my team as soon as game week 2 when there are some odd bad fixtures for teams. So for example, Estupiñán or Gabriel can be dropped in game week 2. That could be a good example, and I can actually walk you through the way I'm actually going to plan to line up my team in game weeks 1 to 4 later on when I don't have any transfers booked in, just to show, for example, the strength of the team without transfers in the future. So that's going to be my team selection for now. In terms of the captaincy, of course, I'm going to stick it on Haaland. I still don't think there's too much of a debate. Yes, you can go Saka. Yes, you can go Rashford. But this is a perfectly good fixture for Haaland. Yes, he's away from home. But ultimately, when the XG is there, when I would say it's still a very easy opponent relative to City standards, there's no reason for me to step away from a Haaland captaincy. So I am going there, and let's quickly have a look at what this team looks like from game weeks 1 to 4 with the hub prediction tool. So in terms of how this team looks game weeks 1 to 4, what I wanted to do was illustrate how it would look if I didn't do any transfers, because the idea really for this test is just to make sure that my team is quite robust. So without booking in additional transfers in the future, how it would look and how it would rate in terms of our initial expectations at this point in game week 1. As far as Areola, he's going to be Turner, of course, so that's going to slightly change my game week 2 values, of course, if I get Turner into my team, because he would be a better option, in my opinion, than Pickford anyways, who clearly, as you can see, has a bad game week 2. But for game week 1, of course, this is exactly how I would line the team out. I just have João Pedro for a very, very good opportune fixture versus Luton Town. And then actually in terms of game week 2, the rating, of course, is 96, and, you know, you have access here to hopefully Turner, who would really improve on Pickford here, who has a bad week, and that should hopefully push up the game week rating as well. And João Pedro can sit on the bench. Now the benefit to this as well is if, let's say, Chelsea looks particularly good, I think I'd be tempted to actually consider maybe actually going for James over Gabriel this week too. So that's actually a bit of a toss-up. But of course, Chelsea, as we know, have great runs from game weeks 3, 4, and 5 in particular. And so that's going to be the value here. And of course, if João Pedro also looks like a good pick, you can see that I can also just simply play him ahead of someone like Gabriel, where I can then just choose one of the Chelsea defenders to actually play with, maybe play a 3-5-2 as well. So the team is actually quite flexible and still quite strong in terms of the rating here. And of course, it should improve, as I said, with Pickford actually moving out, hopefully for Turner in this game week. And then in terms of game week 3, you once again have the full strength of the Chelsea team, finally sort of basking in the strength of the rotation here. And that's sort of the idea as well. Without actually having to force transfers into the future, making sure that the team is robust enough to actually be good in future game weeks. So game week 3, a very, very strong week here, where even the bench is quite strong too. So I could consider, for example, playing some of my Brighton players if I rated them in particular, or let's say someone was injured in my team. And then in terms of game weeks 4, once again, benching the Brighton players here, just simply because everyone else has much better fixtures. This is an opportunity where I would maybe consider transferring out someone like a Saka or even an Odegaard. The reason why is because around this time, Eze actually has a really good fixture run. I could start to actually, for example, go Odegaard to Eze as a loose transfer plan, for example, and that would still actually really benefit the team because I would then actually have the money to go for Trippier next week after this. Or I could simply go and upgrade one of my attackers as well, moving away from someone like João Pedro and then actually using that Odegaard money to actually, boost Pedro into, let's say, a Jackson if he actually looks really, really good in that game week 3 game versus Chelsea for Chelsea, or so on and so forth. So that's going to be how the team looks like between game weeks 1 to 4. It's actually a 98% team rating, but as I said, I think it will actually improve once Turner is actually officially signed for Nottingham Forest, and then we actually get access to a Nottingham Forest goalkeeper who starts, particularly in game week 2, which is seen as like a slightly worse week for me as well. And that's sort of how I see the draft as well in terms of the opportunity. I would even argue that, for example, João Pedro looks much better if we just go back to game week 1 over here and just have a look at him, just because I actually see his sort of expected value being a lot higher. It's Luton Town anyways. I think it's a much better game, for example, than the West Ham game, where he's also rated to have a 3.9 rating. So I think that's one of the players where I would say he probably is subject to having a much better game week there. And for that reason, I will be going with this sort of team selection. It's something that I like in terms of being able to actually get enough depth to cover the future, make sure that my team is robust enough. And ultimately, that's it. I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead. And If you want to get your team rated as well, just please check the link in the description below. All you need to do is actually click on the link and you can actually get your team rated absolutely for free. It's an AI rating as well, and it's not fully updated, of course, because a lot of things are constantly evolving, but you can kind of get a feel for how strong your team is going forwards, and that could be a huge sort of benefit when you plan your early team in Game Week 1 for FPL. So thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think about my team, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead. And I will also be streaming for the deadline too, so I'm looking forward to seeing you guys on the stream. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.